Hi everybody, welcome to the April Lunch and Learn. As you can see, we have many of our participants from the Alternative Spring Break program from this year. You guys got back about a month ago at this point, I guess. So what I'd like for you to do is first, starting with Karla, working out with Tyler, just say your name and where you worked during the week, and then we'll go back and you'll all talk a little bit about your experiences before we open it up for questions. So feel free to start.
Hi, I'm Karla Kuhn. I worked in the Jefferson Building at Library of Congress in the Asian Division.
I'm Dorie Knight. I worked in the Madison Building in the Cereals Department.
I'm Heidi Guardiola. I also worked in the Madison Building in the Cereals Department.
I'm Heidi Taylor Caudill, and I worked in the Jefferson Building with the African and Middle Eastern section.
I'm Melinda Borie, and I worked in the Cereals Division as well.
I'm Lauren Robinson, and I worked at the National Library of Medicine in the Public Service section of the division.
And I'm Tyler Nix, and I worked in the toxicology division of the Specialized Information Services at the National Library of Medicine.
Okay, so the project I worked on was not very exciting. I have to admit that. It did test my language skills because I have a background in business and Japanese. So the project I had to work on was looking at Japanese books. I had to take the author, title, and publisher and put them into an Excel spreadsheet. And what they were using this Excel spreadsheet for was for the surplus. So at Library of Congress, all of the books that they take out for no longer to be rotating that, they put in surplus. Well, unfortunately, I found out that surplus is not organized at all. The books are kind of in sections, but not really. So if someone calls to ask for a book, they kind of have to wander all the aisles to find the book. So what the Asian division was doing is they were taking all of their books that they were moving into surplus and actually cataloging them with a specific number and then the title, author, and publisher so they could actually find them. So while it wasn't very exciting, it was kind of nice to know that I was helping them with a major project. My supervisor was absolutely wonderful because I worked with another girl that was there, Hannah, and she was actually over in Adams Building. So I worked on the whole project over in Jefferson by myself, and if I had a question, I would walk over and find her and all that. But she took us around and was actually walked us through all three buildings to give us an overview. And we got to meet some of the catalogers and conservators and all of that because we would just be walking the hall and she'd run into someone she'd know. She'd be like, oh, hey, this is the group from UK. So it was a great experience. Got to meet a whole lot of people and glad I was able to help out.
Well, I worked on a collection of Civil War newspapers that were specifically bought for the images in the newspapers. Most of them had maps. There were some that had entire pages of cartoons. One had the back page of who I believe was General Butler. I'm not entirely sure. And when I started, I was essentially handed this box full of newspapers, and I had to identify what the content was, measure the image, and say whether it was a map or a rendering of someone, or if it was a cartoon or something like that. Measure it and then folder them individually, title them, and then catalog them into the system. I didn't get a lot of cataloging done, but when I left, they were all labeled, foldered very nicely, and ready to be cataloged. One of the things we did, we did a presentation out on Friday, which I dreaded the entire week. I adamantly did not want to do this presentation. What we were supposed to do is just identify a few pieces from the collection that we wanted to share with the staff and patrons at the LOC. I ended up doing 4 newspapers about Admiral Farragut's expedition. 2 were from 1862 during the Peninsula Campaign, and then 2 from when they took the forts around Pensacola in 1864. And the reason I chose them were they had the coolest maps. It's hard to explain if you can't see them. Just, they were huge and sort of almost, one was like blueprints of the fort. It was really, really neat. And that ended up being my favorite part of the whole experience, was getting to talk to people about these awesome newspapers and why they were cool, and just conversing with people. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, I worked in the same area as Dorie in the newspapers and serials division, but I worked on a little bit different project. It was the historic foreign portfolio newspaper project. So they're essentially some portfolios of historic newspapers that have not been completely processed. And so I was given Panama's collection, and so I sorted through those, and they ranged from mid-19th century to mid-20th century, and so it was a good opportunity to actually be hands-on with the artifacts. And so we rehoused them. So some of them were rag paper, some of them were wood pulp paper. We had the responsibility of determining which ones should be put into protective folders or housing. And based on what we had in our portfolios, we filled out the holdings information for the Voyager catalog records. And then we labeled our folders, put barcodes on, as Dorie mentioned, and we selected a few of them to present at our sort of gathering in the reading room of the newspaper division. And so that was really great to be able to explain to the staff and the librarians there, what we've been working on, how we got to contribute in our short little period of time. And it was a really great experience just to see the working environment.
Well, like I said, I worked in the African and Middle Eastern section with 3 other students who aren't here today. So when we started the project, we were just supposed to digitize just 2 or 3 boxes of manuscripts. Well, when we were presented with the project, we found out that there were actually 30 to 35 boxes, and that it was a slow project that other groups from other schools had been working on and off for several years. And every group had a different way of doing it, and it was kind of confusing for us to come onto a project like that. So we took the initiative, in addition to digitizing manuscripts, we also created a workflow procedure for other groups that would come after us to try to standardize how the process would work. And so the librarians that we worked with really appreciated that. They had a lot of good words to say about UK and the students from the past. And like everybody else, our librarians actually went out of their way to take us on tours behind the scenes, to introduce us to people in other areas. And that was probably the best part of the experience for us, just to see how Library of Congress worked, to see all the different divisions. We even visited the children's librarian and spent an hour talking to her about her area. It was great. So I can't tell you the name of the person's collection that we processed. His name is in Portuguese, and a lot of our materials were, I can't pronounce it, but he was from Mozambique, Africa. He was a high-ranking official, and a lot of the documents that we worked with had to do with gold mining and other activities like that, some of the guerrilla groups that were present. So it was really cool to work with the materials, and I just had a really great experience, and I can say that the other 3 people I worked with most likely did too.
I was working in the serials division. I was specifically working with a collection of historic event newspapers. They had never been cataloged. When I came in the first day, there were just all these newspapers heaped onto a book truck, covered in butcher paper so they were protected, but just laying there. They'd never been handled in any kind of official capacity, so far as I could tell. But I had a really wide variety. A lot of my stuff was from World War II. So the oldest thing I think I saw was I saw the copy of the Indianapolis Star that broke the news about the Pearl Harbor attack. And then I had stuff ranging on up through, I think I had a collection. The strangest thing that I had really was a stack of 2005 newspapers covering the death of John Paul II in Polish, from Poland. And they have very creative headlines in Poland, I learned doing that. Because we had to, in order to enter them into the database, I had to at least sort of painstakingly Google translate so I knew what the actual news story was that I was even covering. So yeah, I assigned everything. It's official Library of Congress barcode, put it in a folder, made sure everything was preserved, and actually entered it into the database. Not only the catalog for Voyager so that people will know that it's in the library, but also into the specific historic events database, which is sort of a special database that they have for newspapers that deal with specific events that people might be researching.
Okay. I worked in the public service division in two sections: the collection access section and the web and reference services section. I spent 2 days in the web and reference service section, and I did 3 projects for them. They recently combined their serve desk and their reference desk. So they were using Gimlet, which is what we use. It's like, we don't use it here, but we use Live Answers, which is similar. And for 2 weeks, they implemented a trial period of all of the people who worked there inserting in the questions and their answers and created general tags. So I went through all of those questions and came up with even more specific tags so that they could pull data from it and realize what they needed to do, like if they needed new signage or anything like that. So I created 13 tags that could be implemented, like a sub-tag to their larger tags. I spent most of the first day doing that. The other 2 days the other day, I worked on the health statistics guide and the library statistics guide. And in those, they have these guides that are for both librarians and the public and researchers. And they have all these links of all these resources that are helpful to them. So I went through to make sure all the links were still properly working, and then I was able to use some of my health science background to find new sources that they could add to those guides. And then those were my 3 projects there. And then in the collection access section, I got to work with ILL, and I got to see the collection, which is a closed stacks collection. It's 65 miles long, 3 stories underground. It was crazy how big it was. And they gave me, I think they get like 7,000 ILL requests a day or something like that. And so what they do, they use DocLine to fill all those requests. And not all institutions are members of DocLine. So they have over 40,000 requests they get a year that have to be hand entered into DocLine by the librarians there. And so the woman I was working with, she wanted to use OCLC ILL services. And she wanted to see how many of those organizations, there's 519 organizations that sit in those 40,000 requests last year. She wanted to see how many of those members were OCLC members, and then present those statistics and say if we were to partner with OCLC in this way, we'd be able to fill these ILL requests and not have to hand enter them in. They'd be keyboarded in every time that one of those organizations sent in a request. And most of them were OCLC members. So she was going to use that to try and implement a new way to do ILL requests. It takes a lot of time. There's 5 librarians that pretty much do that, just enter in all those keyboard requests. And then we got a lot of tours. We had lunch with the associate fellows, got to find out a lot about NLM and what they do. The fellows are a fellowship that they do for a year or 2 years, and they get to learn how NLM works. Within 2 years of graduation from a library school.
Yeah. So, like Lauren, I also worked at the National Library of Medicine, which is in Bethesda. So we were kind of on a different end of town than these guys. And the National Library of Medicine is a huge organization. It has, there's kind of like I forget the official terms, but there's like the library operations division, and then there are basically two kind of different branches that are R&D basically. And one of them does like genomic research and stuff like that, and then the division that I was in, the specialized information services, is just kind of all different kinds of R&D projects. And they're actually located in 2 or 3 different areas off of the library campus. So I kind of had an interesting experience because I wound up switching offices basically all week. So I worked 2 days at the National Library of Medicine and then 2 days at Specialized Information Services, which is kind of in an office park, like a 30-minute shuttle ride away from there. So anyway, that being said, the project that I worked on was to create an HTML-based user guide for a database that they're launching called ToxMap. ToxMap is there's an existing database now that's kind of older, and it's basically a web-based map interface that shows where all the Superfund sites are in the US and all the different toxic chemical waste disposal facilities are. And you can use that site to do research on the types of chemicals dumped in any given location, the amount of chemicals per year, all that kind of stuff. So the current ToxMap system is really dated, and they're updating it right now. They have a beta version that's it's a lot more like Google Maps that they're kind of trying to launch. And they have some videos that are like user tutorials, but they're wanting to create just a section of the website for a user tutorial, basically. So I worked with them they sent me some templates of HTML and CSS for the existing site, and I started working on a template to basically eventually fill in that will be a user guide for the site. And I didn't get very far. We missed a day of work because it was a snow day, the Monday we were there. And then there were some technical issues between the computer I was working on and using my personal computer. So I kind of got a template started that will eventually be filled in to serve as that user guide. And I think I'm going to have the opportunity to continue working on that project as a virtual intern. It's not solidified yet, but there's a good chance for that. So that was mine.
Now we'll put it up for questions from the audience. Anything else that you guys would like to share?
I would add my project coordinators were fantastic, and they, like everyone has said here, they really do make an effort to make it a very engaging and holistic experience. So the first couple of days I was there, I was a little anxious about the speed at which my project was progressing, or lack thereof, I guess. Because I was really just ready to kind of sit down and start working. There were a lot of chances to drop in on meetings that were taking place. I got to go to a delayed St. Patrick's Day lunch party. We went to lunch with the fellows and another administrator later in the week. So there were lots of opportunities to meet people and just visit.
Yeah, we got a lot of opportunities to see the project that they were working on. Some of the ones that they give to people who just come to give tours, we got to see really interesting things. The
Right.
Human Life Project or something, I cannot remember the name of it,
Right.
but where they have analyzed a human body who have been donated to science in different levels. Like I think it was 33 or 3/10 of a millimeter or something sections with a CT scan, CAT scan. Yes. And then they had them in like plexiglass things, so you got to fold them and see all the different levels, and we got to see really interesting things.
I'd say they were really just as glad to have us there as we were to be there.
And it wasn't only tours of Library of Congress, it was also the ability to be able to talk to a variety of librarians to ask about their backgrounds. And they also gave us advice on interviewing after graduation, joining professional organizations, giving us advice like that, and that was just as valuable.
Or any question?
Yeah, it's kind of related to what you're talking about. I know this is going part of this program, and this would be good for future people pursuing this program. What were the arrangements as far as where you all stayed during that week, and how did that work out?
We made our own arrangements, so everybody was in charge of finding their own place to stay. A bunch of us found a place together. People were kind of scattered all over though.
Yeah, I was probably the furthest one out. I think I had family out that way, so I actually stayed just north of Baltimore. And so I actually had to get up every morning at 5 because I had to catch the 6 o'clock train from Baltimore all the way into Union Station. So I mean, it was entertaining taking the train in every morning and all that. And also, I think most of you guys decided to fly to Yeah, because I'm not a huge fan of flying, so I ended up driving the 8-9 hours from Lexington to Baltimore. So, and it's actually not that bad of a drive. Parts of West Virginia are boring.
Yeah, I probably could have been convinced to drive, had other people like just packed a car full of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a good idea to do. I mean, because if you have more than one person, that would have been nice, actually. But
It didn't even occur to me to drive because in my mind, I'm still in Iowa and DC is further away.
And how long have you lived in Kentucky?
Since August 5th.
It's open to anybody, but what was your greatest unexpected discovery about working for libraries?
they had a secret staircase. So when we first got there, like, cause in Jefferson Building, cause like the architecture of that building is just absolutely gorgeous. Our supervisor once, she took us right onto the reading room floor of Library of Congress. So it was like I wasn't even there 5 minutes, and she just wanders us on. And the Asian reading room was right next door. But we had to actually go up a floor and all that. So it's all of a sudden we're walking down the hall, she stops, and in the corner she just opens the door and there's a spiral staircase. So we just take the staircase up and pop out right next to the reading room. So that was kind of fun and unexpected that our supervisor kind of showed us all the shortcuts and all that through the library.
For me, this is probably more so at National Library of Medicine than LOC, but especially in the division that I was in, they do so much research and scientific work that for example, the 2 floors that I spent most of my time on at SIS were librarians working right next to toxicologists, next to data scientists, next to all different kinds of just professional researchers, PhDs. And so the first couple of days I was there, my supervisor kept setting up times for me to meet with librarians, and she kept specifying, like I was surprised, it caught me that she kept specifying that we were going to go over here and meet with so-and-so librarian, because probably the majority of people in that division, at least that I was working near, were toxicologists and other scientists. So it was a really cool atmosphere where there's just all this science happening, and it kind of doesn't matter who's who, you're just kind of all really interdisciplinary teams working on these projects. So.
I kind of expected to be doing like grunt work, to be honest. I ended up, getting to. I couldn't really believe that they were like letting me handle all this. Really like unique historical documents that. I know there's a lot of copies of newspapers from World War II, and covering the Kennedy assassination was another major event that I had a lot of material on. And there is a lot of material like that in the world, but I've never touched any of it before. And they were not only really letting me, but pleased that I was handling that. And I was sort of surprised by the emotional significance to me. I didn't know that I had sort of any emotional connection to newspapers, but they're like a time capsule of how people are responding to things, and you don't really get that any other way. And so being able to be a part of preserving that was sort of surprisingly significant to me.
Well, in our section, the materials came from Africa and the Middle East, and I was surprised to learn how some of the materials arrived at Library of Congress. Sometimes it was just a person serving at an embassy who just picked up a flyer from a person on the street. And it's expensive to ship from Africa, and so they would just collect random things like that into boxes, and the next time somebody was flying into Washington, D.C., they'd just take a box and bring over to the Library of Congress. And I don't know how I thought that materials got there, but it certainly wasn't that way.
One of the things I had was there was a newspaper with an obituary of Lawrence of Arabia in it that some woman had found folded up, used as the backing to a framed illustration that had been in her husband's childhood home, and she found it after he died. And she called the Library of Congress to see if they wanted it, and I guess they told her that they did. Because I wouldn't have known that, but she'd written a letter to accompany her gift, and it was in there. So I got to read that. It was really cool.
Yeah, I would say that in my case, when I was working on the Panamanian newspapers, I didn't really expect to work on Panamanian newspapers first of all, but it turns out that it's the 100th anniversary of the completion of the Panama Canal. So I have Spanish language skills, so they specifically asked me if I would take a look at these newspapers because some of them are bilingual, some of them are completely Spanish or English language. But I was asked to take a look at the newspapers on the first day, and within a day determine if there were some usable newspapers for an exhibit. So I had a surprise task to complete, and so I did wind up finding, I think it was an 1870 newspaper edition that was essentially a chronicle or reporting back of one of the people who was on the expedition to determine the best route through Panama for the canal. So that was a pretty interesting experience to contribute to that, and I think it turned out to be a usable item that they can eventually, hopefully, incorporate into it.
Yeah, she was on you about that.
Once you found out I could read Spanish, then
No,
here you go, Panama.
It was just
You
a
can do this.
mistake.
Yeah, that was exciting.
I think I was surprised at how at home I felt.
Mhm.
I don't know what I imagined the serial archives to be like, but it just felt like I was over at the UK Special Collections. It was just such a very homey feeling there. I guess I imagined it being stuffy, I guess, for the Library of Congress. It's going to be very formal, and no, people were very casual, and I really enjoyed that. I felt very intimate with a lot of the people there.
They were very friendly.
Yeah.
Very open to us.
So it sounds like you were all kind of given a task, but most of you anyway, the task that was actually that required skills and thought. So I'm wondering, well, how did that feel? And then also, just to be at the Library of Congress and to be making decisions, I guess, or have you looked at the catalog to see if your work is shown up or anything like that? But also, actually, what I'm really wondering is, did they train you, or did you feel like you were ready, or what was that like, or did you just get thrown into it? Or?
Thrown to the fire. I mean, Georgia was almost.
We missed that first day, so
Oh,
we
right.
had to cram everything in before, and so it was pretty intense the Tuesday, the day after the snow day.
And I don't know, because you had mentioned, like, once they found out you had Spanish
Mhm.
skills, like, because for mine, like, when I had first put in the request to work for the Asian division, it said, Japanese skills not needed but preferred. And so when my supervisor sat me down and she's like, okay, this is what you're gonna do. And like all the titles were nothing but kanji, and my kanji skills are not that great, because I mean, and I literally sat there for about 30 seconds and just was panicking because I was like, I don't know what this says. What am I gonna do? And then I'm like, well, okay. There's this thing called the internet that can help me. So it's like some of the kanji I could at least pick up, and the others I'd have to actually go out. I knew enough to count the strokes of the kanji, and then I could narrow it down to find my title and all of that. But it was definitely a surprise when she gives me this whole stack, like a whole book. Case of books and nothing but kanji, and some of them I could read, some of them I couldn't. So once you get past the panic, I think we settled in, and I think they enjoyed having us. So.
there were 4 of us working with one supervisor on 4 different projects.
Yeah.
Well, 3 different projects.
Please.
Yeah. And so well, she couldn't really spend that much time showing us how to do stuff. There was a little showing around and introductory stuff on Tuesday, but just a little bit, and then we were kind of on our own. And I would say for me, Wednesday was really the hardest day, because it was the first day that the whole day I was really alone and sort of confronted with how gigantic this task was that I had to complete.
But she did give us deadlines that she enforced. So that was also
Yes.
part of the stress and the pressure was, you know, by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I want you to have this.
And not only did you have to like catalog, but you also had to do research about your collection. Like I had to do a lot of research, like the history of the newspapers that I was looking at, you know, and then trying to decide on a focus. And then once I did decide on that focus, I needed to research that, and you know, it wasn't just cataloging and, you know, organizing.
And
It was
more.
more, yeah.
Yeah, and for the projects that Dorie and I were on, we had to write sort of captions for the materials so that if they were ever featured in an exhibit, they had sort of this, like a paragraph. And it, as she said, talked about like the history of the newspaper, and I never heard of some of these newspapers that don't exist anymore, or the events, like I don't know them all. I know, you know, a little bit about World War II, but not as much as newspapers. For instance, I learned one of the newspapers sort of misquoted, made a poor estimation of how many people had died at Pearl Harbor, like overestimated by nearly 1,000, which is kind of a big mistake. And so now that's sort of in the database for that. But yeah, I mean, we were really sort of fighting blind. She'd made us packets, sort of kind of explaining what we were going to be doing, but it was really sort of my brain alone in the cubicle with the computer and the packet and the materials.
Thank God you were next to me to then too.
Well, for our project, we were all working on the same collection. There were 4 of us. And the way that it was given to us, we didn't have a lot of direction other than we need to scan these documents, capture some information about them, put it over into an Excel sheet, and just try to identify what was in the boxes that we worked on. And like I said before, we took it upon ourselves to go beyond just digitizing to trying to figure out a way to make the process more organized for other groups coming after us. So, you know, we weren't given any sort of direction on you need to scan, you need to put this into the Excel sheet. We just decided among ourselves what each one of us would be doing, and we talked about what we felt like our strengths were. There was one person in my group who had a lot more technology skills than the rest of us, and so she took a certain part of the project, and the rest of us just kind of divided out the labor. And that was just interesting to see how we could work together, because none of us had met before that Tuesday. And so we had to learn very quickly how to work together, how to collaborate on a project. And that was very useful, I think, in building that skill.
I guess I learned a lot about ILL. With the reference services section, I really had a lot more experience. I do reference pretty much every day. So that was a lot. I do LibGuides here and all that, so I was able to use those skills, and I felt pretty comfortable there. The ILL I knew nothing at all about. I didn't know DocLine before. I didn't know how any of it worked. How many requests they got were mind-boggling to me. So I was able to learn a lot, just getting in and cross-checking things between DocLine and OCLC. And they gave me a pretty good understanding of what DocLine did and how they do it with contractors and their employees. So that was probably the most surprising thing. And they have been sending me emails of the things that they've been updating on the guides, so I've been able to learn, or to be able to see some of the things like that. So.
I was pretty terrified my first day. I'd started in LM and then taken another shuttle over to SIS, which is completely off campus from everything else. And we were already behind on time schedule. And the first meeting was to meet, I worked most directly with the guy who's basically the database manager for the ToxPath database. So that's his baby, that's his one project. And our first meeting was to decide whether I was going to basically write all the copy for the user guide or to kind of take one section of the user guide and build an HTML template to get everything looking like they wanted it to look, and then the copy could be filled in later for the rest of the user guide. And I was like ready to go. For the writing copy side, I was totally confident and good to go. But for the HTML side, I'd had a little bit of experience with Drupal and some of the older, like Microsoft front page, some of the older content management stuff. And I'd learned a little bit of HTML in 636 and a little bit of CSS. But we decided pretty quickly that it would be more useful to build the site template instead of writing a copy, because that could be done later. So I was pretty quickly over my head with HTML and CSS, which I had barely used before. And he just basically sent over a bunch of files for me to put on my computer and kind of get everything up and running to use as a template from there. So long story short, I ended up having to use my personal computer instead of one of their computers, and it was pretty scary. I had my computer up for coding and then 2 screens up with like 15 million Mozilla tabs of like how to code. Basically, it was just reading and coding from there. And it took me a little while to kind of gauge my supervisor and like basically what he expected of my skills or kind of what his skills were like. And I was much relieved towards the end of the second day when I started asking him some questions about advice on which way we wanted to go with certain aspects of the site. And he basically said like, he's not an HTML wizard by any means, and like he basically has built all the HTML that he's done the way that I was currently doing it, which was just kind of like stealing copy code from other people and kind of figuring out how to mess with it until it looked right. So I was like, all right, we're on the same page here. So it was good, but it was pretty stressful right at first.
Something that I think was different for us was our supervisor was doing like 1 million tasks roughly throughout the course of the day. She was in meetings like all day, so it was tough to even find her to ask a question if we had a question.
She's running back.
Yeah, she was everywhere.
And I was just like, felt bad interrupting her.
And she left, her carpool left every day at 3:30. So we were there until 5, so that those last few hours we were really on our own, and for most of the day, really, we wouldn't see her.
Like she's just like, she must have been Superwoman or something to do all this stuff, I swear. But I do love that she trusted us enough to just be like, here you go.
Here's a book of more newspapers for you.
So it was a lot of communicating with each other, or, she had introduced us to several other people in the division, so we kind of knew faces. If we needed to ask questions, we had people we could go to. We would kind of share tips on Voyager and cataloging and that kind of thing. So.
Our supervisor also left that Thursday for a conference. So we had another person within the library who kind of took over for her that day. And it was just another opportunity to work with someone else. But we really had to take it upon ourselves to finish our project and make sure that it was complete the way that she wanted us to do it.
So I know you guys didn't have a lot of free time. You work till 5 every day, especially you, Karla, with such a long commute. But what was your favorite thing that you did outside of your internship?
The 6 of us who were living together, we went to dinner like every night, didn't we? Yeah, I mean, that was great. We got to talk about what we were doing and experience different places to eat. I personally didn't do much sightseeing, so but I guess that was my favorite. The sort of social hour or two after getting off work was awesome.
Oh, it was also really fun, like even just taking the metro together to work. Like it was nice just to sort of feel that safety in numbers, and
That was-
especially at first, because none of us really knew what we were doing. We don't really come from places that have really an active or reliable public transit system that lots of people use to go places, and we were all going the same place. So that was one really nice thing about living together.
I'm just thankful for Patty. She knew where she was going. I followed her. I still, if you took me back to DC, there is no way I could get from our place to the library as groceries. No way.
Well, my favorite thing that I did, I was an art history major in undergraduate, and of course I went over to the National Gallery of Art, and there was a Gary Winogrand photography exhibit, and he's one of my favorite photographers, so I spent an hour just walking around the gallery, and it was just, it's always nice to go to a city with great museums, and that was just a great experience.
Got to see a recently discovered Van Gogh. Did you see that?
No,
I saw that when I was there. Yeah.
Did you have to wear any special equipment or do anything special with the historic materials, or was there any kind of protective?
We didn't in the cereals division.
The last day, because actually the reason why Hannah and I were late to our outgoing meeting, in the Asian division, they actually have over in the Adams building on their deck that they have a special area called the cage, they call it, of where all of the items pre-1680, I think it was, but, and the requirements to get in are astounding because the director of the division has the keys. If you want in, you have to go to him, get the keys, go directly to the cage. You have to have 2 people. So both of you go in, and there are cameras everywhere, like every corner, every aisle of this area. You sign in, and you actually have to close and lock the door behind you too. So you have to sign in, state who you are, why you're there, and all that. And the reason we were going on, they were having an exhibit where they had to pick 3 items because the Cherry Blossom Festival was starting up, and they were kind of helping exhibit items and start the festival. So we were actually able to go in and help them pick the 3 items that we were going to exhibit. But then when we realized that we were kind of late on time, so we're like, oh, we all have to go, so we all have to re-sign out and then lock the door again. And then the keys literally have to go directly back to the director. It's like do not pass go. It's like you can't wander around because if not, they'll know who has the keys and they want to know why, and they'll start asking questions on why it took so long and all that. So it's definitely extreme on the security and everything that you have to do just to get into that area.
Yeah, they don't favor cotton gloves there. They just clean hands
Yeah.
was really the only requirement. But it was even kind of difficult to wash hands frequently enough because we had to leave the area. Our IDs didn't key us back in, so we had to, every time we left the office area, we had to come in back through the reading room and tell the security guards, hi, we work here, walk through and let ourselves in the back door.
They got used to our
Funny
faces.
looks, yeah.
They eventually got used to our faces. The first couple days were a little rough, but
So, we talked a little bit about some of the things that library school here and other experiences have prepared you for in UC. Is there anything after your time that you feel you want to work on developing more?
HTML. And CSS.
I'd say that was really the first time I worked in Access, and I found it, I liked it a lot. I didn't know that I would because I'd never seen it before, but I ended up really liking it, so I'm looking forward to doing more with that.
Yeah, mine would probably be back on the language skills because I hadn't dabbled in Japanese for a while and realized how bad they had gotten. So I definitely would like like to try to go back and polish all of the skills that I had.
Well, working in archives, I had worked on Civil War letters before, so I was familiar with the history of the Civil War. I was not, however, prepared for the size of these newspapers and trying to cover them with Mylar and just dealing with these ginormous documents. And I have to say that really coming back, I've recently had to work with some large maps and things like that, and doing that first and then coming back here and working on a collection, and I was like, oh, I know what I'm doing. After the basement I go, and I really enjoyed the experience, and it's really helped me with working in the archives.
Yeah, I really liked the preservation aspect too, and that's something that I don't get to do at my regular job. We're very modern here, so.
I work in cataloging at Young, so that really helped a lot in terms of understanding Voyager when I got there. So, it wasn't as much of an adjustment to me to learn how to do the holdings and the items records and things like that. But yeah, I like pulling items for an exhibit and writing about them and thinking of how I can best explain them to other people. And so that was something that really I appreciated.
Yeah, I agree. Just the way Georgia sort of emphasized to us, think about how these items that you're selecting would be a viable resource for the people who are coming to look at them. That sort of, is making the archives alive for other people.
What's your takeaway from the experience, your elevator speech? If you had just a few seconds that says what this meant to you. This is an easy one.
No, too much happened.
I think being in my last semester of library school, maybe feeling a little burned out by it, but going to Library of Congress and being around so many enthusiastic people kind of renewed some of my enthusiasm about being a librarian.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, people were enthusiastic there. I mean, just everybody. Somebody who I was talking to had been there for 18 years, and she was like, wow, 18 years already? Gosh, has it really been that long? I was like, I want to be that person. I want to be that person who loves their job so much that time just flies by.
Oh, so you just remember, we met one lady in the cataloging department because the catalogers there, they have like a specific list of items they're supposed to do every day and all that. So one of the Japanese catalogers has been retired for like 20 years. Yeah, she's like almost in her 90s, and she comes in every day and volunteers to work on the cataloging for them. And she's so excited, like she met us and she's like, oh my God, that is so, she goes, and I was just like, you come in here. She doesn't get paid. She just comes in and volunteers her time to do the stuff the other catalogs don't have the time for. And I was kind of amazed that, after you retire that you would still want to come in and volunteer, just to do the same thing you retired from. So.
The real quick thing I was going to say specifically about the National Library of Medicine is that, there's a national network of libraries of medicine that's kind of like it's kind of like a regional, system that operates all throughout the country with different hubs in different areas of the country, and then kind of feeder libraries from there. So being at NLM, it was very down to earth and kind of casual in some ways, like y'all were saying. But it really also it had this very, very palpable feeling of kind of being the epicenter for all that. So if you're in the medical track, if you're a student in the medical track, or you're interested in medical librarianship, one of the librarians told me there that if you're involved in NLM, even if you live out in the rest of the country somewhere, at some point you're gonna work on some project or do something that's involved with NLM in DC. And so to get a chance to be there on the ground level and see where it all happens is worth it for sure.
Did you get to select your projects or you were selected for
I think we gave our top 3 choices
Yeah.
and the ones available, and then were replaced.
So it was kind of a mutual selection
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
We didn't really have that. We didn't.
We had an opportunity in our application letters to kind of, or maybe I just took the opportunity. I wrote about one division that looked interesting to me, and I wound up in that division, but I was assigned a project within the division, so it was kind of half and half.
And I wrote about public services because that's what I do every day, and then more than the technical services. But I got some experience.
Any final questions? Silly souvenir.
What was that?
Really souvenir.
I bought for my best friend at the International Spy Museum a magnet that's a garden gnome that's a spy. It's kind of difficult to explain, but it's ridiculous and it's awesome, and she's gonna love it when it's her birthday.
That really happened. I still have my Metro card. That's about it.
Oh, I kept some tags. We had to go through security, you didn't have to. I had to go through
Twice, you
security.
did every
Yeah,
day,
I had to go through security every day, and you had to check in, and they'd check your ID, and then scan your driver's license, and then you had to wear this paper in a plastic thing around all the time. And if you left the campus, it was a gated campus, you had to walk all the way around and get back through. And I did that once, but I kept one of the 5 or 6 of them that I had. So that's probably the silliest one.
We had to give our ID cards back. It was very sad.
How did you
What?
No.
Georgia, our supervisor, gave us pins of, they were little bundled newspapers. And you could reprint on them. It was so cool. They were so adorable.
Yeah, and everybody's is different, so we each have our own like personal newspaper. It's so cute.